Jesus called his 12 disciples to him and gave them authority to drive out evil spirits and to heal every disease and sickness.
The Bible contains remarkable stories of miracles and divine interventions. Moses parted the sea. Peter healed a man lame from his mother's womb. Jesus drove demons out of people and raised others from the dead. But are these types of events still happening today?
We too have a beam of divine light and guidance that God has put within the heart of every man. And it's one of the greatest proofs that there is a God.
More amazing supernatural things are happening than we realize.
This is Divine Intervention, the interview show that features intriguing people who've experienced the hand of God in amazing ways. Divine Intervention was created and produced with the purpose of encouraging believers, spiritual seekers, and skeptics alike that Jesus is alive and is still performing miracles and working in the world today.
I believe in miracles.
Here's your host, Daniel Fazina.
Hello, friend, and welcome to another episode of Divine Intervention Radio. I am your host, Daniel Fazina. Very grateful that you are taking the time out of your busy schedule to spend an hour with me as we listen to yet another testimony of how the Lord has worked in someone's life, transforming them. And, you know, friend, He is changing the world one heart at a time, and I'm very excited to bring you yet another story of just how He is doing that. Before we get to our special guest today, I would like to remind you that you can check us out at divineinterventionradio.com, divineinterventionradio.com. If you miss any of the shows, they're all archived there, as well as on YouTube, youtube.com/Divine Intervention Radio, and Facebook, facebook.com/Divine Intervention Radio. Please go to the page and like the page, and also go to the YouTube channel and comment and like and subscribe to the channel. That would be a big help in growing the channel. And also, it'll enable you to be notified as soon as we upload a new episode of Divine Intervention, which we do pretty much on a weekly basis. There's always new things that the Lord is doing, new testimonies. That's one of the things I love about this show, is that there's never any shortage of miracles to showcase because God is alive. Jesus has risen from the dead. Praise God. Hallelujah. He's conquered sin and death. And, that realization changed my life, and I'm hoping that it will change yours as well. Because after all, if Jesus wasn't risen from the dead, what are we doing here? I mean, what's the point of anything, really? If He didn't rise from the dead, then we're all still dead in our sins, as the Apostle Paul puts it. But if He did rise, then we have the hope of salvation, the hope of eternal life, and that is a beautiful thing, my friend. Well, today's special guest is going to be talking about a very hot topic, one that's very politically charged in our politically correct culture today, and that is the subject of homosexuality. We're going to be talking about things like, if you are gay, are you born that way? Is it a choice? There's so many aspects to it. Is it genetic? Is it environmental? Is it culturally influenced? And so we're going to talk about all those things from someone who has been living in the gay lifestyle and then was redeemed by the blood of Christ. We're going to be talking with Becket Cook, and he is the author of the new book, Change of Affection, a gay man's incredible story of redemption. And I'm sure it's going to be very intriguing and encouraging. His book was phenomenal. I just had a chance to read it, and man, what a page-turner and what a great story. I love it. Becket Cook was born and raised in Dallas, Texas, and after college he moved to Los Angeles to pursue a career in writing and acting, ultimately becoming a set designer in the fashion world. In 2017, he received his master's degree from Talbot School of Theology at Biola University. He now spends much of his time in ministry, speaking at churches, universities, and conferences, and we're going to get his testimony right now. So it's my pleasure to welcome Becket Cook right now on Divine Intervention Radio. Becket, you are on Divine Intervention Radio. Welcome, and thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Daniel.
Well, it's my pleasure and honor. I was really thrilled to receive your press release and equally thrilled to read your book, A Change of Affection. I really enjoyed it. I found it well-written, humorous, and very insightful. So congratulations on a great work.
Thank you.
Sure. No problem. And we definitely want to get to the details of your book and your story. So before we do that, though, why don't we start with the beginning? Tell us about your background. Who is Becket Cook, and where did you grow up, and what was that like for you?
Well, I grew up in Dallas, Texas, born and raised, and I grew up in a Catholic family, went to Catholic schools my whole life, to Jesuit schools in Dallas, and I was the youngest of 8 kids, so it was kind of a crazy.
Wow.
But it was always fun. But early on, when I was very young, I don't remember exactly how old, but I remember, becoming aware that I was attracted to the same sex, and I didn't know what to think about that or do about that. And so as I got older, that desire was still, there, and I thought, oh, well, this isn't, like a permanent thing. This will eventually go away, and I'll, get married to a woman and have a family. But as I grew older and into high school, it didn't go away, and I ended up becoming best friends with someone in high school who was gay, and we came out to each other, and so that was a turning point in my life, because that's when, we started going to gay bars in Dallas. We were very young. I mean, we were like 15 years old going to gay bars. I don't know how we got in.
I was going to say, how did you get in?
No. And then there was a club in Dallas called the Stark Club. And it was designed by the famous French designer Philippe Starck. And I remember we got into the Stark Club. They put us on the guest list like the first night we went there. It was really, because it was really like the cover charge was very expensive, and we were on the guest list. And anyway, I remember the first time I walked in there and I just saw the people there. They were like, straight people, gay people, drag queens, like all these different people, and I just remember thinking, wow, like these are my people, because when I grew up, I was a popular kid, but on the inside, I felt like a misfit, because I had this kind of secret that I couldn't tell anyone. So when I finally kind of walked into this club, I was like, oh, like I can be myself, and I can, be real here. And so that was kind of a moment in my life. And then after high school and when I went to college, my best friend in college turned out to be gay too, and we came out to each other, and it was the whole thing. And we like explored gay life together. We confided in each other. So I had someone to talk to, because I was still in college. I was still in the closet. I still wasn't out. And so then after college, I moved to Tokyo with my best friend from college, because we both were like, what are we going to do with our life? Because I was pre-med in college, and anyway, so we moved to Tokyo because I realized I didn't want to be a doctor, and we did that for a year, and that's when his friend from Dallas came to visit us, and we ended up falling in love, and that was the first time in my life where I was like, okay, this is who I am. This is my identity. I'm gay, and that's when I was empowered to come out as gay I came out to my family and my friends, and that's when I was, that's when it was no longer a secret.
It's interesting in your book how you paint the picture of Tokyo as being a very repressed and very, even more so than America, in terms of, the homosexual lifestyle, and how in the closet everyone is, and even just in general not expressing their feelings and stuff, and yet that's where you felt comfortable coming out. That was kind of ironic, I thought, in your book. Can you talk about that dynamic a little bit?
Yeah, this was in the 90s, and so in Japan in the 90s, and in Tokyo as well, I mean, being gay was way more frowned upon than it was in America. And we would go to these kind of underground gay bars in Tokyo, and these guys that we met there, they would never, ever dare to come out to their family. I mean, it would just put shame on their family. So, but it was odd, because I guess I was so far away from home,
right? I
felt kind of just this freedom to be me, and so in Tokyo I felt this odd kind of sense of freedom, even though I was in a culture that was more or less repressed in a lot of ways. So
Gotcha.
That was an interesting experience.
Right. And I also, remember reading about how during that time in your life, you used the quote, God wasn't even on your radar. Or maybe that was a little later, I'm not sure. But can you talk about, you're having Catholic background, Catholic roots. What was your idea of God like at that time?
Well, I grew up, as I said, in the church, and I went to Mass on Sundays, and I obviously went to Catholic school, so every day, we said the Our Father, we said the Lord's Prayer in Latin, and, it was like, I was very involved in the church, in the Catholic Church, but I never felt a connection to God. I never felt like that God was real.
Okay.
And especially since I was realizing that I was gay, I didn't really want anything to do with God, because the older I got, and especially into high school when I really started to explore gay bars and all that, God was something that I knew was kind of off the table for me and wasn't an option, because I knew that, I was gay, and according to Christianity and to the Bible, it was a sin, so I can't really be a part of that club. So God became more and more remote as I got older, especially when I moved out to LA after Tokyo. God was just like, God wasn't even, I never even thought of God. Really, I just never entertained the idea that there was a God.
Gotcha. I gotcha.
Yeah.
In Japanese culture, I understand that less than, I think maybe like 1 or 2% of the population is Christian. And I remember maybe it was about 20 years ago, talking to one of my Japanese friends who came to visit, and I was, telling her what I was involved in. And at the time, it was InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. And I was just kind of like trying to witness to her. And she said to me, I never forget, it was so funny. She said, Japanese people don't care about religion. I was like, okay, well,
yes.
Maybe most of them don't. But it was just funny to me. And reading your book kind of brought that back home for me. Anyway, I digress.
I didn't care about religion. I didn't want religion because I knew I didn't want anything to inhibit what I was doing and what I was feeling. And
sure. Yeah, I get it.
Religion was off the table for me.
And I know for a lot of people, there's a big conflict between trying to follow Jesus and if they're, if they have same-sex attraction. It's a big deal, which is why, one of the reasons why I loved your book and wanted to speak with you on the air about it. So tell us about, you came back from Japan, and you eventually did come out to your parents, and you described this in your book, the reactions of, both your mom kind of breaking down and just sobbing for a while, and your dad having that kind of awkward conversation. But tell us, how did your parents and your siblings react to this news? And how did you do it, first of all?
Well, the way I did it was
not do it.
When I was in Tokyo, my sister wrote me a letter, because she kind of put 2 and 2 together and realized that I was probably gay, and she wrote me a letter and said, "Hey, Becket, are you gay? Blah blah blah." And then I wrote her this letter back. This was before email.
Okay.
I wrote her a letter back, and at the end of the letter, I said, "Please don't tell Mom and Dad, because I'll tell them when I get home." And but she, of course, told them immediately. And so by the time I got home from Tokyo, she had already told everyone in my family. So, which was kind of a relief, so that I didn't have to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So when I got home, the first night I was home, I walked into the kitchen, and my mother was, she was so happy to see me, but then she started crying. And I was like, "Mom, what's wrong?" And she said, "Oh, I know that you're homosexual." And I was like, "Mom, it's okay. Like, this is fine. Don't worry about it." And I just kind of tried to, calm her down. And she was fine. I mean, there wasn't like a dramatic scene. It was just, she was just very, she was very calm about it and very mellow and loving toward me through all of it. And then my dad, like, the next day came up to me and said, "Hey, Beck, are you angry with me for, not doing this and this when you were a child, or like not being a better father or something?" And I was like, "Dad," I remember saying to him, "Dad, no, like it's not like, this is not about you. This is who I am. Don't worry about it. And so I kind of brushed it off, but my parents were pretty lovely about everything. They weren't, I didn't get grounded or like kicked out of the house or whatever. And also because I was also, an adult. And then, my siblings didn't really acknowledge it. So
okay.
we never really spoke about it with them.
So it's kind of like an elephant in the room with them?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I really talked to myself, because they were all, out of the house, and they they were married and had their own lives, so I didn't really sit down with each of them and talk about it. It was just kind of like this thing that was known, but we didn't really talk about.
Gotcha. I understand. Friend, you're listening to Divine Intervention Radio. I'm your host, Daniel Fazina, and we are visiting with our special guest, Becket Cook, and he is the author of A Change of Affection, a gay man's incredible story of redemption. Now, Becket, when you came out to your parents, you had a relatively good experience, or smooth, I guess you could say. But for a lot of people, it's not like that. And in your book, you detail some suggestions for people both who are coming out to their parents and parents whose kids come out to them. And one of the things that you mentioned that I thought was helpful is, if you're gay and you've been struggling with this or dealing with it for your whole life, and then you come out to your parents, don't expect them to be on board right away, because they're just kind of finding out about it, and a lot of times they're clueless. And so you have to give them time to process it. I thought that was very good advice. But can you kind of go into that whole dynamic and why you felt that would be a good thing to include in your book?
Yeah, I mean, because there's this, as you just said, kids. When I was a kid, I had years and years to process the idea that I was gay, basically, and so by the time I came out to my parents, you kind of expect your parents to be 100% on board when you come out to them, even though they've had no time to process it, and it's like a shock to their system, especially Christian parents. Like, it's a shock to their system, and I think both parties need to give each other grace, and the parents, instead of reacting because that moment when a gay child comes out to their parents, to his or her parent, is a very it's a moment you never forget. And you can talk to any person who's gone through this, you never forget that moment, and so it's a very crucial moment to really kind of navigate well, because I think in that moment the parent needs to just the parent it's going to be shocking to the parent, and I know it's not easy, but the parent needs to kind of just take a step back and just maybe even just go into the closet and cry or whatever, and kind of process it before they react to it, and then the child needs to give the parent some time to process it as well. But yeah, I mean, the worst thing a parent can do is obviously fly off the handle and kick the child out of the house and just start beating the child over the head with the Bible or whatever. Those kinds of things are not helpful at all, and in fact they really push the child away more. And so in those kinds of moments, kind of quoting Bible verses to the child, I've never seen that actually bring that child to Christ. I actually see that just pushing the child away even more. So I in those situations, it's best to just for everyone to just take a moment and be loving towards each other, and kind of the parent just help kind of work through that with the child, and just be patient and kind of and love them through all of that.
Good advice, I would say, as someone who's been through it, obviously, and you can speak to on both sides of the issue, because we're going to get to how you actually found Christ, how God got a hold of you and really changed your life, and this happens in a variety of different ways for different people, and your story is obviously your own, and we want to definitely get to that. One question I did want to ask you before we get to how you came to know Christ is, what are your opinions about why people are homosexual? And you go through several factors, and that's a very multifaceted, subject, obviously. I want to ask you this. You are one of 8, and you said your father, in your book, you told him, hey, you did a great job, and then you put in parentheses, not exactly true. And I don't know if this is true or not, but I've heard, and from some gay people I've talked to, that many gay people don't have the best relationships with their father. Is that a factor you found both in your life and the many gay friends that you have?
Yes, but I mean it's more complex than that, because I had the same father as my 5 brothers had.
Right.
So it's like we all had the same father, and he was kind of distant from all of us.
Okay.
So it's like why aren't my brothers gay?
Right. I know that's not the only factor.
I think that could be a factor, but I don't think it's the factor. And I also think that that just puts all the blame on the parent, and I don't think that's really what. I don't think that's helpful, and I think it's it's multiple factors involved.
So what are the factors that you think are involved?
I mean, first of all, no one really knows why someone, just because Lady Gaga says you're born this way, that you're born gay, that it doesn't mean it's true. Because obviously, that's just sloppy science. That's just sloppy science, and because no scientist would ever say that there's a gay gene. Scientists across the board are split on this issue, and they don't. No one knows. You can't find a peer-reviewed scientific article that would say you're born gay. They think that there's kind of 3 factors. One is maybe genetic predisposition. One maybe hormonal in utero when you're in your mother's womb, and one factor may be the environment that you're raised in. But I think it's a combination of all. I don't know the answer to that, but as I say in the book, it's all a moot point, because even if a scientist discovered a gay gene today, that wouldn't change anything, because we're all conceived in sin. We're born in sin. And
right.
So because of the fall, we're broken, and our sexuality is distorted. Even heterosexual people's sexuality is distorted to a certain degree.
Right.
And so it doesn't matter if there's a gay gene, if you're born gay or not.
That's true.
We're all born in sin, and we all different people have different struggles.
Gotcha. All right. Well, on that note, we're going to come up to a short break, and then when we come back, I'd like to hear about that fateful day in the coffee shop where someone walked in and was doing something that you were just shocked by, and you actually probably had never seen before in LA, as you describe your little, your enclave there. So we'll talk about that fateful day and how it changed your life right after the break. Friend, you're listening to Divine Intervention. I'm your host, Daniel Fazina. We'll be right back with more of Becket Cook right after this.
You're listening to Divine Intervention with Daniel Fazina, and we'll return in just a moment.
I believe in miracles.
Hey, this is Daniel Fazina of Divine Intervention Radio. Jesus calmed a raging storm, healed paralytics, and even raised the dead. But are these types of events still happening today? The answer to this question, as you will see from reading my book, Divine Intervention, 50 True Stories of God's Miracles Today, is an emphatic yes. Contained within the book is a collection of amazing true stories that attest to this fact. More information about Divine Intervention, 50 True Stories of God's Miracles Today can be found at divineinterventionradio.com.
Hi, I'm Rabia Scott, and you are listening to Divine Intervention Radio with Daniel Fazina.
slow.
Welcome back to Divine Intervention Radio. I'm your host, Daniel Fazina, and we are visiting with our special guest, Becket Cook, today. He is the author of the book, A Change of Affection, A Gay Man's Incredible Story of Redemption, and his website is achangeofaffection.com. Becket, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
Not a problem. So I was very intrigued by your story so far, and we left off before the break coming up to the point where God got a hold of you and changed your life. And at that point, you'd been living in L.A. And why don't you give us a little bit of a background about what your life was like in Los Angeles and what you were doing, and then how that kind of led up to a fateful encounter in a coffee shop.
Yeah, so, I moved to L.A. after Tokyo, and I ended up kind of getting into a group of friends that were really fun and smart and ambitious, and they were all from the East Coast, Ivy League schools, and they were, they all were in show business. we were all, aspiring writers, directors, actors, producers, and it was funny because in our 20s, suddenly, one friend would just get a 5-picture deal at Fox, or one friend would just sell a screenplay, or one friend would just, produce a movie, and it was all happening in real time, and my friends were becoming really successful, and it was kind of a wild time in LA, and because they were, we were all in the business, we were invited to all of these things, and so I went to movie premieres all the time, and to the Oscars, the Emmys, the Golden Globes, and to the after parties, to the Vanity Fair party, and all these different things. I went to, dinner parties at movie stars' houses, and just I met everyone and did everything. There was this one, I talk about this in the book, but this was kind of a typical situation, in LA for me, is I got invited to this party at Prince's house, the singer Prince, and I just, I remember we showed up, and he was renting a huge, gigantic mansion up in Benedict Canyon in Beverly Hills, and we showed up, and we walked in, and I was like, I wonder if he's going to perform tonight, and I saw at the end of his gigantic backyard that there was a stage set up with everything, and with a giant Prince symbol, that whatever symbol he used, and then he ended up performing for 3 hours, and that,
wow,
like in his backyard, and there was like 50 to 100 people. It was kind of amazing.
Wow.
So I had like this private concert with Prince, but that was like kind of typical, of the experiences I was having in LA, and it was just, that's what I kind of thought that life, that's what I began to believe what life was all about. I thought it was all about, making it big in your career, finding true love, and having these amazing experiences. That's what I thought, okay, this is what life is all about, and, just kind of get as much out of it as you can. And so that life was really fun for a long time, and, I was friends with, Minnie Driver and just a bunch of other movie stars. Like, we were friends and went on vacations together. And
yeah, you mentioned all these experiences, and you talk about how, like, in your circle, they were all very progressive, very liberal, and no one ever even talked about God, like, at all in all these years.
God was never mentioned among my friends, and because it was assumed, it was assumed that God was a myth, that God wasn't real, and we never even had to say it. It was just assumed that God wasn't real, and that God was just for people in the South or something.
Flyover states.
No offense, but that's kind of what we just thought, and Christians. Christians were always viewed with suspicion, and we just kind of thought Christians were crazy and insane, and so we never once talked about. No one ever said, "Do you believe in God?" It was just kind of assumed that it was like a fairy tale, and no one did. And so,
wow, that's amazing. But I can relate to that, because I grew up in New York and went to college in New York City, worked in New York City for a while, and it's not that much different than LA in that respect.
Yeah.
Well, maybe LA is maybe a little bit more progressive. I don't know. I'm not sure, but I encountered that kind of attitude as well. Or if anyone did have religious persuasion, they kind of kept it private, you know.
Yeah, and I mean, I was very progressive and liberal. As I said in the book, I would go to Ariana Huffington's house for cocktails and dinners, and like she started the Huffington Post.
Right, yeah.
And so I was part of that whole kind of West Coast elite kind of progressive crowd, and it was funny, but yeah.
And you describe in your book so well a scene at a soiree, I guess it was a club in Paris, where all of this kind of came to a head, and you were kind of thinking, you're taking in all this glitz and glamour and the whole life, but you were empty. And can you talk about that? Because I think that was probably a turning point for you, right?
Yeah, that was a huge turning point. I was at Fashion Week in Paris, because I used to go to Fashion Weeks in New York and Paris. And in March of 2009, I was at Fashion Week, and I went to a bunch of the shows and to a lot of there's usually after parties for the shows, and I was at this one after party, and everyone from the fashion world was there. I think Kanye was there. I know he was there during the Fashion Week. I saw him at a bunch of the shows, but I think it was at the party. But I just remember just looking over the crowd that, everyone was dancing and drinking champagne and having fun, and I just had this overwhelming sense of emptiness, because I had just kind of come to this point in my life where I was like, gosh, I've been doing this stuff. I've been going to these parties and meeting all these people and doing all these things, and it was fun for a long, long time, but it's not sustaining me anymore. And it was kind of, I got to that moment of, is that all there is to life? Just these parties and this, whatever. I just felt super empty. I left the party, went back to my hotel, and I just was up all night, kind of in a panic about the rest of my life. I was like, what am I going to do for the rest of my life? Because I can't just keep doing this. This is not going to sustain me. And so I was up, and then I came back to LA a few days later, and I got busy with work, and kind of sort of forgot about the night in Paris, and then cut to 6 months later in LA. I was at a coffee shop with my best friend who was gay. I was at a coffee shop with him in Silver Lake, which is, kind of like the hipster part of town of LA.
Okay.
And we were sitting there casually drinking our lattes or whatever it was, cappuccinos, and we turned and we look, and at the table next to us there is a group of young people with like 5 Bibles on the table. Which I had never seen a Bible in public in LA, or I had never seen a Bible public. So it was a shock to both of us, because my friend was an atheist too, and at this point I was an atheist. I don't even think I was agnostic anymore. I was just an out and out atheist at this point in my life.
Okay.
And we saw these Bibles, and it kind of intrigued us. And we were like, what is going on? This is crazy to see this in L.A. And
as if God is not allowed in L.A., right?
I know. Well, it could be banned soon in California. But so we ended up, my friend kind of urged me to talk to them and see what they were all about, because he loved to sort of engage in kind of controversial conversation. And so I was like, I turned to them and I said, hey, are you guys Christians? It's kind of like a Christian's fantasy, like a non-believer just be like, are you a Christian? What do you believe? And so I said, what do you believe? I grew up Catholic, and I don't really remember, and they were evangelical Christians. And I said, what do you believe? Because I don't even remember I don't know what Christianity really is anymore. And they explained their faith, and they explained the gospel, and we had a really great conversation. It was like an hour or so long, maybe longer, and then I, of course, get to the $64,000 question, and I say, well, what does your church in Hollywood believe about homosexuality? And they said, well, we believe it's a sin. And I just remember just kind of accepting that and not reacting, because 5 years before or 10 years before, I would have said, you guys are crazy and you need therapy.
Okay.
but I remember just accepting it because of that night in Paris. 6 months before, I felt that emptiness, and so I was like, well, maybe I'm wrong. I mean, there's a tiny, slim chance that I'm wrong, and that maybe God does exist, and if he does exist, maybe being gay is wrong. Like, what do I know? Maybe I've built my entire life on this false foundation, and I don't know. And so I was open to the idea of being wrong about it all.
I applaud you for that, because not many people are, gay or straight. A lot of people are set in their ways, and they don't want to be challenged, or they don't want to think. And I think the thought of being wrong is so terrifying to most people that they don't even want to consider it.
Well, it's terrifying because as I said, you build your whole life on this identity, and so it's really scary to think about unraveling that identity.
Right.
It's very scary to do that.
Sure.
So they invited me to their church the following Sunday, and so I had a week to think about it. And I told them, I said, well, let me think about it. I don't really know if I'm going to come. And then, sure enough, the following Sunday, I wake up and I get dressed and I get in my car and I drive to this church. It's actually in a high school auditorium in Hollywood at a public high school. And I show up and I have no idea what to expect because I didn't know what an evangelical church was or what it looked like or sounded like. And I walk in and there's worship music playing and I immediately cringe because I was like, oh, I forgot there was Christian music. Oh my gosh! And then, but then like a few seconds later, I was like, wait, this isn't bad. I don't mind it. And then I found my seat near the front, and I sat by myself. The people who invited me, I don't even know where they were. I didn't see them, and so I just sat by myself. And the pastor comes out and starts preaching for an hour on Romans chapter 7. He was in the middle of doing a whole 2-year series on Romans.
Okay.
So
wow, you really got into it.
Romans. And while he was preaching, this strange thing started happening. Everything he was saying and was resonating as truth in my mind, in my heart, and I didn't know why. And I was literally on the edge of my seat, sitting on the edge of my seat, just totally blown away by what he was saying. And I was like, whoa, this is the gospel? And it turned everything I thought religion was on its head. And it was the first time that I really understood the gospel. And I was like, whoa. And it was just so, I didn't want him to stop preaching. I just was so enthralled with it. And he left the pulpit, and he said, before he left, he said there's people on the side of the church who can pray for you if you need prayer for anything. And then, so I had this moment, because there was 30 more minutes of worship time. So I had this moment of, should I go over there and get prayed for? If I do, it could be humiliating. I don't know. People might be watching me. But anyway, so I walked over and I got prayed for. And it was really intense. It seemed intense and powerful, the prayer, and it just seemed very loving from this guy. And then I walked back to my seat, and that's when it all went down. I sit down. Everyone's kind of standing up, singing and worshiping, and I sit down, and all of a sudden the Holy Spirit just overwhelms me, and I just started bawling, uncontrollably bawling, and it was God in that moment revealed himself to me, and it was kind of like this. He made it so clear to me. He's like, I'm God, Jesus is my son, heaven's real, hell's real, the Bible's true, and you're now adopted into my kingdom. Welcome.
Wow.
He just started bawling and bawling and bawling, and it was like Isaiah in the temple, when he sees God's holiness, he comes undone, and that's what happened with me. I just experienced God's presence and his holiness, and I just completely fell apart, and I cried for the rest of the service for like 25 minutes, and I knew, and it was like the curtains finally parted, and I could see the truth for the first time in my life. I could see reality for the first time, and
what did that reality look like to you?
it was just like I knew where I came from, what I was doing here, and where I was going. I knew in that instant that, you know, I was here, that God was real, and that I was on this earth to be in relationship with Him.
And I love that.
Christ. And it was like this kind of instant moment, and it was kind of road to Damascus moment. And then I came home after the service, and it happened again. I was in bed trying to take a nap because I was so freaked out by the whole thing. And God, it was like, you know, Moses in the cleft of the rock when God passes by with His glory. And God just kind of passed by my bed, you know, and just, He's like, let me show you some more of my glory. And I just jumped out of bed and was crying again. And I just said, God, you have my whole life. It's all yours. I'm done. Wow. And that was it. And I knew in that moment, I knew for sure that being gay or living that life was wrong, that it was sinful, and that it was something I was not going to do anymore. But I didn't care because I had just met Jesus Christ, and I was so overwhelmed with joy that I was like, good riddance to that old life. Like, I don't want to even think, I don't even want a part of that old life.
Right.
I want this. Like, I want this new life with Jesus. And
that's amazing. Isn't that wild how sometimes it can happen just like that? The scales just come off, and you get a revelation of God. Friend, you're listening to Divine Intervention Radio. I'm your host, Daniel Fazina, and we are visiting with our special guest, Becket Cook. He's the author of A Change of Affection, A Gay Man's Incredible Story of Redemption. I highly recommend you pick up the book. It is an amazing read. We're going to put a link to it on our website, divineinterventionradio.com. You can also check out achangeofaffection.com. Becket, you talk about, you know, good riddance to that old life and being gay is wrong, but there's a distinction, I think, and maybe you can shed some light on this, between homosexual orientation and homosexual lifestyle or action. And I think that's an important one. I mean, can you talk about that? And, like, you know, one of the questions I think anyone wants to know is, can you be gay and Christian? And does God immediately deliver you from homosexual attraction or orientation when you give your life to Christ? Can you speak to those issues?
Yeah, I mean, yes, there's homosexual orientation and homosexual behavior are two different things. You can have that orientation, you can have that, you can have same-sex attraction and deny yourself and take up your cross and follow Christ. But engaging in homosexual behavior is sinful. And so the idea of can you be gay and Christian is a tricky one, because you can have, gay orientation and be a Christian, but I wouldn't even call it orientation. I don't even know what the right word is. I guess just same-sex attraction.
Same-sex attraction, right.
But yeah, when people call themselves gay Christians, I'm always curious why they use that terminology, because I would never call myself a gay Christian, because I would never identify myself with a sin and then a Christian. So I wouldn't call myself a gossiping Christian or a greedy Christian, so why would I call myself a gay Christian? And I understand it's kind of shorthand for saying, I struggle with same-sex attraction and I'm a Christian, but I would never want to speak that over my life, like, oh, I'm a gay Christian, I'm a gay Christian. Like, so when people ask me, what are you? I just say I'm a Christian, and I still, God didn't fully heal me of same-sex attraction. I still struggle with that, although I got to say, God has huge amounts of grace on that, and it doesn't dominate my life as it used to. It doesn't dominate my thought life.
It's not your identity anymore, right?
It's not my identity, and it doesn't really dominate my life at all. So, I never have this desire to go back into that life. I never have a desire to have a boyfriend again or whatever, because I'm in Christ now, and I don't want to be a part of that anymore. And so
So what does your life look like now that you've decided to follow Christ and were a gay man?
Well, I mean, now I'm single and celibate, and I'm happy to be. I'm happy to be that, single and celibate. I mean, Paul in 1 Corinthians 7, he says it's better to be single. He's like, I wish everyone could be like me.
Right.
And I feel that way. I just Paul to me is a good example of someone he was single. Jesus was single too.
Right.
Paul was single, and he never kind of was self-pitying about it. All he cared about was running around the Mediterranean and planting churches and spreading the gospel. I mean, he was like beaten and shipwrecked and jailed and all this stuff, but he didn't care because he was on a mission. And,
that's right.
And that's how I feel. I mean, I feel like this life is so short. It's such a vapor. And all I care about is sharing the gospel with people.
Well, I appreciate that
I don't care about, I don't feel like I'm being cheated out of something, or that, I can't have a boyfriend and I can't have a partner. It's like, no, I'm in a relationship with the King of the universe. Like, why I am, and it's so completely satisfying that I don't want that. So I'm happy to be single and celibate, and
that's great.
Be on mission for Him.
I appreciate that you want to share your story, you want to share the gospel, and you talk about Paul being shipwrecked and beaten and going through persecutions, and Jesus obviously was the prime example of that, having gone through betrayal and flogging and ultimately crucifixion. And he warned his followers that we would have persecution, we'd have tribulation in this life, but take heart, He has overcome the world. Everybody has their cross to bear, and there is a price to following Christ, and you've paid that price as well. Can you talk about some of the struggles you've had as far as persecutions and losses you've incurred because of your stand for Christ? Yeah,
I mean, I lost several close friends, especially when my book came out 2 months ago. That's when that was the kind of end of a lot of my friendships with my old kind of group of friends, because that was kind of like, okay, it was okay for you for years to be a Christian and to talk about it, but it's a different thing when you write a book about it, and so that was really painful to lose those really close friends that I've had since high school, and then I actually lost my job. I've been a set designer, a production designer for 20 years in LA, and I was with a huge agency here, like the top agency in the world, and 3 weeks after my book came out, they suddenly dropped me, and it was pretty shocking. But I also knew that God was taking me into a new direction and kind of to a full-time ministry with this book, and because the whole point of this book is to help the church understand the issue of homosexuality biblically, theologically, culturally, and from someone who's been on both sides of it. And so that's what I think God is calling me into now, is to really help the church understand this. And I just like Paul, I can't. It's like, yeah, I suffered loss, but as Paul says, I count everything as loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus, my Lord. So I count everything as rubbish compared to knowing Jesus. So it's painful on the one hand, and it's difficult, but on the other hand, it's like, but
you've had some good experiences.
I know Jesus, and I have eternal life, so that's amazing.
And you detail some of the joys and the victories, as far as maybe some of your friends, some of your old friends, being intrigued by your story and even coming to faith. Can you share maybe a couple of those stories in the minute or two we have left?
Yeah, one story that happened recently, which was amazing, is my friend Eddie, who actually, I mean, I've known him for years in LA. I've known him for, 20 years. And he was gay, and he actually assisted me. He was one of my assistants for a while when I was a production designer. And I, when I first got saved, I told him about it, and I was like, oh my gosh, Eddie, like, Jesus is real. It's crazy. Like, it's insane. And he was like, or, he would make fun of it. He would kind of mock me and say, "Oh, honey, like that's crazy. You're, and he would, he would ask me like, "How's baby Jesus?" And kind of mock the whole thing. But cut to 10 years later, I saw him at a wedding, and I ended up spending a couple of hours with him before the wedding, and really going through the gospel very clearly. And I showed him, I actually showed him kind of an audio, like a visual kind of description of the gospel. Like, this is the gospel. This is, this iPhone is you. This is, this wallet is sin. It's covering you. I kind of went through that. And then I sent him a Bible. I went on, online, and I sent him a Bible to his place in Palm Springs. And he had been, over the last 6 months, he's been reading, he was reading the Bible unbeknownst to me. And then, like, a couple months ago, he called me and he said he was a Christian. And now he's totally on fire for Jesus, and he's given up that life. He's no longer living the gay life anymore.
Wow.
So
that's awesome.
So that was kind of amazing to see.
So the gospel can change anybody, and that's one of the reasons why I do this radio show. We feature people who've experienced God in all sorts of ways, from dramatic conversions to near-death experiences, dramatic healings, miracles that God does in people's lives. And one of the biggest miracles, I think, is a changed heart and a changed life, and that's what Christ can do for you, friend. Anything you are going through, whatever it is, there's nothing too big for God to handle. He knows you. He made you. He created you, and He loves you. Becket, unfortunately, we are out of time. I could talk to you all day, but, unfortunately, the dictates of time say that we need to wrap up. But if there's anything you want to say to anyone listening right now, maybe they don't know if God is real, maybe they're struggling with same-sex attraction, what would you like to say to them?
Well, I would just, before I went into this church the first time, I remember taking the idea of homosexuality as my identity and putting it on the shelf. And I would just encourage anyone listening, especially those who are gay or struggle with this, to just put that idea on the shelf and just ask God, God, I want to know you, and I want to be in a relationship with you. Help me do that, and help me, and just maybe read the Gospel of John. I would just encourage them to just keep knocking, because, God will answer.
Amen. Well, Becket Cook, it has been an honor and a privilege to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your courage, and thank you for just following Jesus and wanting to get the word out. I appreciate you, sir.
Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate being on the show.
All right. Well, friend, that about does it for another exciting episode of Divine Intervention Radio. I hope it has blessed you and encouraged you and let you know that God is real and still changing hearts and lives, one person at a time.
You've been listening to Divine Intervention with your host, Daniel Fazina. You can email Daniel at divineintervention@mail.com. That's divineintervention@mail.com. All programs of Divine Intervention are available online at divineinterventionradio.com. That's divineinterventionradio.com. Join us next time here on Divine Intervention.